What's up? My name is Drew Paul Bell. Today, what I want to talk about is the difference between architecture school and working in an architectural office. I've kind of noticed that in transitioning from college to the real world architecture office, is that I think it's actually very similar to the things that sports analysts say about moving from college sports to professional sports. They say that when college football players move up to the NFL, that now all of a sudden they're playing with people who are faster, stronger, and more powerful than them. And that's exactly what happens in between architecture school and practice. I know from talking to many of my friends as well as my own experience to know that in school you were kind of working on your own and you're surrounded by a bunch of other people that were still like only 5 years into this, and it was easy enough to look at your own stuff and think that, oh yeah, like I'm doing really good. And then you get out into the field and you're now all of a sudden you're working with people who have been doing this for decades, and you realize that like you're really slow. Like that's what I've noticed. One of the big things is this difference in speed. They're just faster, and as an intern, I feel like a little bit inadequate at how quickly or how slowly I do work and how long it takes me to get things done. But I look at all my friends and I see posts on Facebook and just from talking to people that I think this is something that a large majority of students struggle with. They get out and they're used to kind of being the top dog at school because by the time you graduate, you're a senior, you are kind of the top dog. But once you get into a firm, you're back at the bottom of the totem pole again. And speed is a major factor in all of this. So that's one difference. Another difference I want to talk about is I think in school, what you actually do is like you learn about not architecture, but the idea of architecture. You don't really learn about structure. You don't really learn structure. You don't really learn assembly. You learn about the idea of structure and the idea of assembly. You're playing around with a lot of thoughts, but without having that real world implication, without knowing that whoever builds this building is going to find all these problems. It creates kind of this disparity, this difference between school and architecture. What I mean is, like, for example, I worked on a project about it was a pier, and in creating this pier, I was basically like building a model of it, and in doing this, one of the problems is one thing that led the design, I should say, is that the coursing of the CMU actually sets up the heights of the bench, the trellis, and the top of the columns. Back in school, we might talk about the idea of these concrete columns supporting the structure for the pier, but in the office you actually have to get down and dirty and do that math and figure out where is this stuff actually going to be, because it's not easy to just attach an I-beam to the middle of a CMU coursing. Instead, you have to have this line up with the coursing. You can't just arbitrarily decide, okay, I want this trellis to be like 9 feet above the deck, but if that doesn't line up with the coursing, you can't do that. So you have to get in there, do the math, make that stuff work out. Another problem I ran into when I was modeling this was there's like bumper rails along the edge, and there's like blocking in between. There's through bolts that go through those to support it to the deck. Underneath the deck, there are joists. The through bolts were interfering with the joists at one point, and you have to make an adjustment for that. When they're going to assemble it, you can't have those things collide. They can't both occupy the same space. And it only overlaps by like half an inch. But in the real world, half an inch does make a difference. When you're only dealing with the idea of the bumper rail and the idea of the pier being supported by I-beams and CMU blocks and wood decking underneath that or joists underneath, it's easy to gloss over that conflict, that problem. But that's something that has to be fixed. And it's not the end of the world. It's not like this biggest problem ever. It's just that you have to take a few minutes, sit down, do the math, and figure out how often does this blocking need to go. Can it be 18 inches with 24-inch gaps, or is that not going to work? Does it need to be 24 inches with 24-inch gaps? And if so, how does it need to be lined up on the joists? These are the problems that architects deal with in the day-to-day. It's this kind of, this is assembly. This is what it actually takes to make architecture. It's not just drawing pretty ideas and making sure your presentation boards look good and making your model convincing. You know, when you're dealing with, when you're building things at a 16th inch scale with cardboard, you can fudge that half an inch. You know, if something doesn't line up quite right, because you don't assemble it like CMU blocks and I-beams and joists. You assemble it like cardboard and chipboard and poster board and stuff. So when you're dealing with different materials, when you're dealing with only the ideas, it's hard to really get rooted and grounded into what's actually critical to make the architecture happen. And this difference, though, this aspect of architecture, I think it discourages a lot of people. A lot of people get out of school and they love thinking about the ideas and the arts and the pretty pictures, but dealing with the real world consequences is challenging, and it is necessarily like that. It's what makes architecture architecture. The fact architecture in terms of all the arts is arguably the most material of all the arts. Music, conversely, is probably the least material of all the arts. It's what makes music music, and architecture is grounding in the tectonics is what makes architecture architecture. So I guess I'm kind of like displaying this idea for you, offering it to you to consider. In terms of like managing your own expectations for what you're going to get when you get out of school. Also for what you need to prepare yourself for. You know, some people might argue that in school, you know, maybe architecture is so long, it's such a long career that if you don't start learning these things in depth until after you're 5 years into it, then that's fine, right? Maybe. I would say you need to learn these things earlier, at least to some real rigor of understanding. And when you're only looking at pictures or drawings and textbooks or writing, you know, free response questions about things on tests, you're only dealing with the ideas of it. And, you know, admittedly, that's kind of hard. It's hard to make yourself really care about it to the point, I don't want to say like it matters, but like it matters of much significance. Because when it's not going to be built, when it is only going to be a cardboard model and posters on the wall, then you know, what's motivating you to get to that level of understanding. But I would argue that getting to that level would really prepare you for what architecture is really about. And it may seem tedious, some people might not like it, but I think that there is beauty to be found in that. And of course it's maybe a little bit less exciting than, you know, the airy-fairy pretty pictures, right? Because what's wrong with that? And who wouldn't love to just do that, you know? Just draw pretty pictures all day and not have any like real world consequences. Not ever have to really exert yourself to make those things happen. Now, of course, even like artists, they have to, you know, exert themselves to make their concept adequately represented, but still, you get my point. So understand this difference between school and practice, and use it to really prepare yourself and understand the difference. Anyway, I hope this all helps, and I'll talk to you next time.